Well, we may as well get started. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming today. And just a reminder to turn your phones off to silent, please. My name is Jordan Douglas. I teach photography through art and design. And first, I'd like to thank my colleague, Brian Collier, Professor Collier, for inviting me to curate the first of two visiting artist exhibitions this fall. And with that opportunity, I quickly arrived at Rachel Portesi. I first experienced Rachel's dimensional work at the Ava Gallery in New Hampshire last year, and was immediately taken with her use of early photographic process, handmade tintypes, along with new technologies in her multifaceted installations. Her work is personal, with universal themes, evocative, and simply beautiful. Portesi exhibits internationally and has received numerous awards and honors. And before I hand it over to Rachel, I'd like you to know that we'll leave some time for question and answer at the end of her talk, and then please join us for the reception of The Nature of Things at the McCarthy Art Gallery immediately following. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to St. Michael's College, Rachel Portesi.
I'm going to attempt to use this microphone. If you can't hear me, start waving mildly or something. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to thank you all for being here on this glorious Vermont day. Thank you, Jordan, for the wonderful introduction. It's truly a pleasure to be showing my work here at St. Michael's. This exhibition was made possible by the Mark and Donna Vanderheiden Endowment, and I'm deeply grateful for the support. It's opportunities like this where I'm invited to develop, explore a new project rather than present pre-existing work that are really deeply meaningful, and they're valuable to my process. The work in this exhibition builds on methods and techniques that I've used in the past, while also taking them in new directions. In this talk, I'm going to show how through walking in the woods, I shifted from photographing mushrooms for their beauty to thinking of mushrooms as symbols of connection, hope, and as a metaphor for the cyclical nature of life. While walking in the woods, I found a feeling of connection that was transforming, but really difficult to explain. I found evidence, however, everywhere in religion, literature, even ancient philosophy, that the feeling of overpowering connection that I felt in the woods is something that humans have been experiencing and drawing inspiration from for a very long time. And in fact, it's an essential part of the human experience that in many ways the modern world is making it more difficult to access. Growing up, I really didn't like mushrooms at all. It's amazing, but I love them so much now. At the grocery store in the 80s, these were what you would find for mushrooms, and I would move them aside on my plate and kind of avoid them. In the 90s, I dropped out of college for a couple of years and I moved to a commune in southern Vermont called Total Loss Farm, or Packers Corner Farm, pictured here. And a few of the original commune members were there, and they loved foraging for mushrooms. There was this excitement in the air when either Smokey or Veranda would come in with a large mushroom haul. I still didn't eat them. I heard that it was easy to mistake a poisonous mushroom for an edible one, so I just stayed away. But I love the celebratory nature of it. And also, I fly fish, and I keep my favorite spots, just a little secret. And I found camaraderie in the mushroom foragers and that. They never would give away their best spots in the woods. Then for a while, I lived in Brooklyn. I worked in the restaurant industry, and I managed restaurants. Eventually, I consulted on the opening of a restaurant where they served hen of the woods mushrooms on the menu, and I tried them and absolutely fell in love with hen of the woods mushrooms. I started going to the local farmers market in Prospect Park on Saturdays and visiting the mushroom man and buying loads and loads of these hen of the woods or maitake mushrooms. Now, it's not that I suddenly liked mushrooms, because I didn't think to try any others. I was like, I found this mushroom and I'm sticking with it, so I did. Many years later, I married a man who foraged for mushrooms. And he and his 3-year-old daughter loved them. At first, I didn't really want to eat them. I was like, ew. But I wanted to embrace this new family culture. And eventually I grew to love osteri vinokas, which is the Finnish word for oyster mushrooms. I went from not liking them to finding it really difficult to have any to share at supper time, because I would snack on them while cooking the rest of the meal. The image on the right is of my stepdaughter helping brush the dirt off the delicate flesh of the oyster mushrooms. They'd set a bunch aside for dinner that night, but also par-cook some and put them in the freezer for holiday meals like Christmas or whenever we needed one of those Vermont winter boosts from the summer. I can't help but think of this painting by Peter Ilsted, a young girl preparing chanterelles on the left. So it was on a walk with my good friend and my husband during COVID that I first began to notice the beauty of mushrooms. My husband collected some mushrooms, and I held a little oyster mushroom petal in my hands as I walked, and I just kept noticing the beauty of the gills. It's like I was looking at them for the first time. And when we got home, instead of bringing them into the kitchen, I brought them right into my studio, and I began photographing them. You know, as I mentioned, it was during COVID, and I'd already begun photographing flowers. I'd stopped working with my models while we all hunkered down and the world grew quiet. At the time, it felt so nice to be alone in my studio studying flowers and mushrooms. It kind of made the uncertainty of the world fade into the distance. They were kind of, I guess, a kind of slowing down at a time when we all needed to see a little beauty and hope in our suddenly private worlds. So I spent hours and days looking at flowers and mushrooms. And as the mushrooms wilted and the flowers wilted, drooped, discolored, and decayed, I found beauty in them at every step of the way. It kind of encouraged me to try to find beauty in myself as I age as well. In 2017, I visited Venice, Italy during the Architectural Biennale. I have to say I was a little disappointed because I've always wanted to be there for the Biennale. And, but I bought a ticket to the Architectural Biennale and went, and it was life-changing. I saw this exhibition that was absolutely amazing. In this exhibition, biologists and architects looked to nature for solutions to architectural problems. There's a name for it I have here somewhere. Okay, biomimicry. So through this concept of biomimicry, they asked the question, how does nature do it, and how can we replicate this highly functional system? One that struck me the most was they're looking at the body's cooling and heating system and wondering, how can they apply this to a large building? I think there's a lot to be learned from nature. These days, we face uncertain times, and I feel increasingly worried for our nation. And these mushrooms feel like little beacons of hope and inspiration. And I found a few lessons in the woods and in mushrooms that I think we could really use as a society right now. This is an image of a lion's mane mushroom. It looks so foreign and almost monstrous or beast-like. And in this exhibition, I've printed it really large to heighten that sense of otherness, making them appear alien. In reality, lion's mane mushrooms hold profound medicinal properties. Studies have shown that lion's mane mushrooms contain two special compounds that stimulate the growth of brain cells. And in animal studies, they've seen hope and promise that it can help prevent Alzheimer's disease. Now, medicinal mushrooms have been around for a long time. Mushrooms like shiitake and reishi have been studied for their anti-inflammatory properties, immune support, and even anti-cancer properties. For me, lion's mane mushrooms kind of represent how we might approach the otherness we see in people. Just as fungi reveal themselves as hidden strength and beauty, and interconnection when you move past the initial strangeness, or at least I had to move past the strangeness around mushrooms. So too can human difference shift from respect and even to inspiration. In both nature and society, the unfamiliar, what we label as the other, has the power to deepen empathy, expand perspective, and remind us of the richness that diversity brings. I learned about the mycelium threads and that they extend far beyond plants' roots and help share nutrients and water across plants. In this way, the remains of one organism, decomposed by fungi, directly nourish the living, strengthening the web of life itself. And mycelium networks link multiple plants together. Trees have been observed transferring carbon to shaded neighbors through fungal networks. In effect, life feeding life via the fungal network or system of the forest. I find that inspiring as well, that we too could share resources and that sharing ultimately makes the whole stronger. So mushrooms are these ultimate repairers. Not only are they able to heal our bodies and minds, but through a process called micromediation, certain fungi can break down and immobilize pollutants like heavy metals and pesticides. Now, oyster mushrooms have been used in various micromediation efforts. They can clean up oil spills on land, and they're even deployed in these tubes to clean up oil spills in the ocean. So mushrooms can heal, not only through plants, in sharing resources in some parts of the human body, but also in many ways our planet. So at the heart of this exhibition is my desire to share this kind of spiritual experience I found in nature, in a kind of walking meditation in the woods, and the kind of philosophical thinking it led me to. As a photographer, my first instinct is to pick up my camera and try to capture something, but my camera just could never ever capture this feeling of being in the woods. It's hard to even find words for. So I found myself feeling really connected to everything, plants, animals, and even connected through time, almost like this sense of time collapsing. Now, as I was trying to make sense of this feeling I was having, I realized that the mycelial networks underground in the forest floor were mirroring the feeling of connection I felt above ground in the woods. It was like the boundary between myself and the world began to dissolve. I experienced like a sense of unity and knowing that we are all part of something cyclical, vast, eternal. It was around this time that a close friend of mine introduced me to the philosopher Lucretius, who wrote the book On the Nature of Things, which inspired the title of this exhibition, The Nature of Things. In On the Nature of Things, Lucretius explains that everything is made of atoms, invisible, eternal particles that join, disperse, and even recombine. It says nothing's created from nothing and nothing vanishes into nothing. Life and death are not opposites, but phases of circulation. Humans, animals, plants, and stars all share the same substance. He believes that individuality is real, but temporary. At the atomic level, we are all one. This very much resonated with me and what I was feeling in the forest. But this is what really absolutely blew me away about this philosopher. He wrote this somewhere between 90 and 55 BCE. That's a long time ago, a very long time ago, and well before scientists discovered that we are indeed made of atoms and these particles all the same. So I find it absolutely remarkable. As I mentioned, fungi are the decomposers in ecosystems, breaking down complex organic matter that most organisms can't digest. These nutrients are taken up by plants, which feed herbivores, carnivores, literally turning death into new life. On the Nature of Things, Lucretius reminds us that nothing perishes, that atoms disperse, recombine, and rejoin in an endless circulation of life. I see this truth embodied in fungi, which transform death into renewal through the vast mycelial networks. Mushrooms are not only healers of the ecosystems, but living proof of Lucretius' vision that in death, we do not vanish, we simply become more deeply woven into the fabric of life. I really love this idea, and thinking of death as part of life is something that I've thought about a lot in my life, and I've made photographic work about as well. And I'm just going to take a minute right now to share a little bit about how my idea of death and life has evolved over time. So I remember the day I realized that I was going to die. I don't know what brought it up. I was 16 and I just knew it. Like, I am going to, there's no way out. To be alive means you're going. And I thought, no one asked me if I wanted this. It was really kind of traumatic. But I thought, that's not going to be for a long time, not till I'm old. But another experience made me realize that's not necessarily true. When I was 25, I actually lived in Burlington, and my 19-year-old cousin Scott drowned. And that's when it really hit home, that death comes for us all, and we don't know when it's going to show up. It was really crushing and devastating, this realization, losing my cousin, but also, right, it makes you think of your own mortality, and it did me. It left me a little dumbfounded and paralyzed, but then it motivated me. So the Victorians have this practice of memento mori. Memento mori means literally, remember you must die. And I kind of used my cousin Scott's death, I took that to heart, and I tried to remember that I am going to die, and I used it to motivate me, and to help me appreciate life or make decisions. So I ask myself questions like, will you regret this on your deathbed? And that helps me decide what to do. Or it helps put things into perspective, like, is this really going to matter? Another experience I had around mortality was in my 20s. I was walking through the woods in Marlborough, Vermont, and I stumbled upon an abandoned graveyard. I don't know if anyone else has had this experience, but it was long forgotten. It was so long ago that most of the stones that were weathered down, you could no longer read the names, the dates, anything. And I thought, whoa, you take solace in that people will remember you, right? But if humanity goes on, there will be a day when no one's there to visit your grave or to remember you. It's another way of thinking, what's happening now really matters. While in that graveyard, I did decipher this one gravestone. It took me a while. I was reading it, and this is not it, by the way, but I found this online. It said, behold, as you pass by, as you are now, once was I, as I am now, you soon shall be, prepare for death and follow me. And I was alone, and my arm hairs stood up, and I thought, oh my God, it's not even Halloween. But as freaky as that gravestone is, it was really common in the Victorian era, so you keep an eye out if you're interested in scaring yourself like I did. I think part of what we grapple with, or I know what I grapple with, is this distance from nature cycles that we have in modern society. Birth, death, even our food systems have shifted over time to become less community-oriented, instead are removed from our view. I believe this veil of separation, likely created to make things easier, has instead created a distance from the natural cycle of life. And this distance perhaps has inhibited our connection to each other, to nature, and to our life cycle. Can you guys hear me back there? Am I moving my head around too much? All right, thank you. Recently, my best friend Jessica's mother passed away after a long journey with cancer. And like in the previous photos, my friend Tricia and I were there to help her son come into this world. We were also there to help her mother pass. I was there in the hours before she passed, and I watched her face shift in peace, but with a lot going on. It looked like so much was happening behind her closed eyes. It reminded me of those sped up films of clouds passing over a landscape. It was peaceful, it was nice, Sometimes when we were talking about events, like logistical things around this event, her brow would get furrowed and she'd come back to alertness. But then when we spoke of love and kindness, she would shift back into this beautiful dreamy state. I was able to say goodbye to her. She woke up a little bit. I was kissing her all over her face and she giggled and woke up. A couple hours later, I was back at home and she passed. And my friends, Jessica and Trisha, anointed her body. And the next morning I went and we physically wrapped her in a shroud, carried her body and buried her in the earth. And it's something I wouldn't have known how I would handle. It sounds sad and tragic, and it was on one level. It was also so beautiful. This woman was surrounded by loving people to touch her and hold her even in death and love her. It was really powerful. In fact, it took my fear of death away completely. I want to go out like Jean did. It was lovely. So this piece is in the exhibition, which you'll see after this. I hope you all head over to the show. This piece considers the fear of death I had when I was younger and to the settled place I feel now. It symbolizes my struggle to come to terms with the fact that all things are temporary and that ultimately this allows me to live a more full and authentic life. So we haven't always been so removed from the beginnings and ends of life. I mentioned earlier the Victorians and their memento mori. Memento mori was often made from the hair of the deceased. And then these next two images are from my hair portrait series. In my hair portrait series, I use that metaphor of memento mori and hair as a tool for self-reflection. And in this work, I honored and said goodbye to past parts of myself that I no longer felt served me or needed, or they weren't parts of me anymore because I had grown as a person. And through the making of that work, I asked myself what I wanted for the next half of life. I'm 53, and it's caused me to self-reflect on, what do I want from the next years? I knew I wanted to use them wisely. I knew that I wanted to live truer to myself, but I wasn't sure what that really even meant. And I found that answer very unexpectedly in nature and in the woods. And I'm just going to talk a little more about that experience. So my walks in the woods illuminated a clearer version of myself. I had these moments where I felt so connected to everything and so comfortable even with my mortality that I felt, I guess the best way to say it is I felt safe enough to see myself more clearly, right? We all have these stories or ways we make sense of the world and ways to protect ourselves. And in this place that I go to, is for no better way to say it, I feel safe enough to let those boundaries down. I'm safe enough to see myself clearly, my role in the world, my role in my own hurt, and I'm able to let my hurt go. And they know that my hurt and injuries no longer feel personal, but part of this vast connection and system. So for me, this feeling above ground that mirrors the mycelium networks underground, it has the power to heal me. Just as the oyster mushrooms have the ability to clean up a toxic spill, this kind of self-reflection enables me to clear up some kind of toxic parts of myself. So this feeling and this newfound relationship with nature sent me on an investigative journey. I revisited Walden that I read in high school. Thank you to Mr. Cotto, wherever you are, my great high school English teacher. And in these pages, I found evidence of powerful, almost religious-like experiences and connections in nature. And it felt really good to read, put to words, the feelings I was already having, but struggled to talk about or make sense of. For instance, Thoreau writes, "Being alone in nature, amid the swayings of the pines and the hickories and the rustling of the oak leaves, it is as if every part of nature spoke to me and I to it, and we are all related. I love it every time I find something that makes sense to me and speaks to that feeling that I couldn't make sense of. So I did find it curious that just as I was inclined to do, people, when describing this feeling of being in nature and connection, they tend to use the same language that others use to describe being in the presence of God. They often reach for the same words: awe, wonder, transcendence, peace, surrender, connection. So in the towering majesty of a forest, the quiet hum of life beneath the forest floor, the endless sky, these evoke feelings not unlike those described in spiritual or religious experiences. In these moments, boundaries will soften. The self feels small, yet intimately linked to something vast and mysterious. This shared language, I think, reveals a truth about the human experience. Whether framed as the divine or as nature, these encounters are expressions of our deep longing to connect with a reality greater than ourselves. The sacredness people find in prayer or ritual echoes the reverence inspired by a blooming flower or a sunset. Philosophers like Lucretius invite us to see those feelings not as proof of supernatural beings, but as natural reflections of our embeddedness within the living world. The atoms that compose us are the same ones that cycle through the soil, trees, and stars, that binding us invisibly to the world around us. So that the sacred language is thus a poetic testament to our awareness of this profound interconnectedness. Early religions focused heavily on nature, incorporating something called animism, this belief that spirits inhabit all living things, plants, animals, etc. Now, many religions teach us that God made us in his own image. When I was walking through the woods, I became certain, or I wondered, that if in order to explain this feeling of connection, if man maybe created God in his image, it wouldn't be the first time that gods were used to do so. If you look back to the Greek gods, Zeus represents the sky, Poseidon the sea. When you look back at Greek, you can easily see that they used gods to explain the mysteries found in nature. But even before these Greek gods were the primordial gods, the first god with form was Gaia, Earth, the great mother of gods. She was known as Mother Nature, who provided the life force for all beings. And long before that, early religions focused on nature, fertility, and women. I believe that recognizing this connection between the language of nature and the language of the divine can open up new ways of understanding spirituality. One rooted not in separation, but in unity. Not in fear, but in wonder. Not in dogma, but in the living, breathing world that surrounds us every day. And that through religion, the feeling of connection found in nature has been recast as the divine hand, distant, controlling, rather than a living, communal network in which all beings participate equally. I'm going to change the subject here a little bit. For all these amazing feelings that I had in the forest, I couldn't help but think back to a time in high school and another time in college where I also felt deeply connected to nature. In fact, it seemed as though the plants and trees were breathing and swaying and dancing. I had ingested psilocybin, or magic mushrooms. I feel like I can't have a talk about mushrooms and spirituality without talking about psilocybin. But before I do, I would like to say I'm not condoning or encouraging the use of illegal narcotics. They can be dangerous outside of a controlled medical setting. And none of the dried mushrooms in the exhibition are magic mushrooms. So don't eat them for fun or any reason. So we've just learned about this recently. The New York Times, this is really popular news science. Modern research is showing that psilocybin can occasion mystical type experiences, and that participants in these studies use terms nearly identical to classic religious language. Unity with all things, transcendence of time and space, deep peace, awe, or sacredness, loss of fear, or even death. So these are all things that I can access in the forest without the use of psychoactive substances. And I have to say, it's a little more deeply meaningful. The journey there seems just as important as the experience. The thing that most prevents me from this feeling of connection is often my phone or the internet. I mean, surprisingly, the internet is strikingly similar to the mycelium networks as well, right? But many of us have, and I know that I have, become increasingly disconnected from the natural world, in part because of this new technology. And I mentioned that the digital networks in some ways mirror the mycelium networks. But this new connection is paradoxical. While it promises unprecedented access to information and community, it can also foster isolation, alienation, and fragmentation. So, by bringing together the science of mycology, the philosophy of Lucretius, and the contemplative experience I've had in the forest, my work reflects on how death, regeneration, and interconnectedness are not separate themes, but different expressions of the same enduring truth. That's it. Thank you all for being here today. Here I am in my studio with my big camera. I didn't talk about process in this artist talk, but you can feel free to ask questions. I'm just going to mention that the images in the exhibition were originally tintypes made on my big camera here. Tintypes is an early form of photography. They're made in camera, they're direct positives, each is one of a kind, so think like a Polaroid, basically. I've scanned them and then printed them really large for the show. So, I don't know, feel free to ask any questions. But no pressure.
So I'm interested in the relationship between that tintype process and the subject. What can you talk about that? Why that's the medium?
About why I use tintypes?
Yeah.
I'm really fond of instant photography in general, tintypes and Polaroids, because I don't have as much control over it. And I also really like handling things, the material aspect of it. I don't spend a lot of time on a computer editing the images. There's some kind of magic that happens in this process. And you can see the variation, especially printed large in the gallery. All these things happen on the plate. There's a certain lack of control, which I value. It's almost like I do this, and then something else happens, and then this is what's created. Interestingly enough, in the exhibition, I also have these videos. I scanned my tintypes, and I used AI to make some of these mushrooms move in different ways in these videos. And AI seems about as far from tintypes as you can get in some way. However, it's similar in that you put this information together and then something else happens. Like some pretty crazy stuff happened. I just picked what I picked there. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Well, I have a comment and a question. Spending some time with your work, I hadn't thought of those mushrooms as portraits until you just connected it with the animus and that beautiful tintype in a case of a little morel, and suddenly it just felt like a person.
Yeah.
That's my comment. But I also, I'm glad you touched on the defined tintypes first of all, and then touched on the use of technology and AI. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about all the videos we're going to encounter in the gallery.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And on the note of them looking like people, they they really did become my little friends, and I kept them. Like, no one's allowed. You'll see some of them in the exhibition. But I drove my family crazy with my house smells like decaying mushrooms right now. I think I just fall in love with their shapes as they twist and turn, and I don't want to give them up. And this one looks like a little can dancer or something. They felt like pets. And so in the exhibition, I have a few videos. When you walk in, you'll see these kind of dancing lion's mane mushrooms, which were made with AI. And I also have an installation with stumps and these other little videos of nature, of mushrooms decaying and regenerating in people to illustrate our connection, as well as the connection of how the internet and technology is combining with that. And then there's yet another sitting on a stump with headphones, and it's a lion's mane mushroom. Again, I used AI to make it look like it's breathing, and the headphones have a little sound to them. I think those are all. That's what you asked about, right? The videos? I didn't start talking. Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious about the wicker burial tray that you have in the exhibition. What is the tradition that comes from? And how did you come across it?
So I believe that burying people in wicker burial trays is a Native American, part of the Native American culture. I'm not sure what else. This is made by a woman in Western Mass. I bought this. I myself will be buried in this burial tray. You can go and make them with her. You can go make them for a loved one. They're really incredibly beautiful. She's a really special person, I think. Anyone who deals around birth and death seem to be some kind of, there's something special there, yeah. So I purchased this, and her information is in the gallery as well, if you're interested in a burial tray. And so I made this, the mirror is representative of that gravestone I saw in that abandoned landscape in Marlborough, Vermont. Behold, as you walk by. And then the interior represents my embracing the feeling of going back into nature. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
So you had mentioned you found it difficult to try to capture the feeling that you had when you walked in the woods, and it ended up kind of resulting in what you presented now. Do you think by kind of like removing the mushrooms and bringing them to your studio, like, do you think that you were able to like capture the nature of it and the connection that you had, or is like, what was that feeling as processing and moving through and like capturing them?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that the images of mushrooms themselves capture that feeling. For me, it was just that I was already loving the mushrooms and how beautiful they were, and then I was having this outrageous, life-changing experience in the forest. And it was just an aha moment for me, like, I'm working on these in the studio, and then this is happening in the woods. And it suddenly just felt very connected, and it led me to kind of look at the world and that feeling that I was having through the lens of a mushroom and the mycelial networks. So I don't expect anyone to walk in and see the mushrooms and have a religious experience. But if you do, let me know. Yes.
This is a kind of a boring question, but I noticed some really beautiful textures in the backgrounds of the mushrooms, and I'm wondering if those textures are from the actual backgrounds, or was it the process of your technique?
Yeah, thanks. So Cecilia's pointing out that, and there's a lot of texture in the background of the mushroom images, and you'll really see them in the gallery. That's from the interaction with the tintype and my lack of control that I mentioned earlier. It just, these crazy things happen. When I was first making tintypes, I wanted them to be clean and perfect, and all this stuff kept happening. It was so frustrating. But I embraced it and fell in love with it. It's definitely part of the process. There is one tintype in the exhibition sitting on a stump, and that's what the original tintypes look like. And the scans look like that. They've been edited to look differently. I didn't want to just blow up that exact same image, so they have been edited to look more like film and to maybe bring out the contrast, and those the flaws are more noticeable in the images on the walls than in the actual tintypes. All right, thank you very much, you all. I hope to see you over at the gallery, and if there's a question you didn't ask here, feel free to approach me there and ask them. Thank you. Oh, wait, can I take a picture of you guys? I can capture this one. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a lot of-